Knocked 3 times. No answer. Behind the door, laughter. Her brother's laughter. 10 years of marriage. Gone in one night. 3 kids. 1 suitcase. Nowhere else to go. Her mother's voice, muffled through wood, "There's no room for you here." Her father didn't even open the door all the way. Just enough to say no. Just enough to close it. She stood there. Rain soaking through her coat. Her youngest asleep on her shoulder. Water dripping from the porch light above her, cold against the back of her neck. And in that moment, something in her went quiet. Not broken. Quiet. The kind of quiet that plans. The kind of quiet that remembers every second of a night like this, in perfect, unforgiving detail. What she did over the next 18 months would leave her entire family speechless. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Coralie Bennett. 36 years old. Mother of 3. To understand what happened at that door, you have to understand what came before it. Coralie met Julian at 24. A community college mixer, of all places. He was charming in the way confident men often are, quick with a joke, quicker with a compliment, the kind of man who made a crowded room feel smaller and more personal just by walking into it. They married 2 years later. A modest wedding in her aunt's backyard, string lights, and folding chairs and a cake her mother had insisted on making herself. Big dreams, small budget, and a belief, the kind only young couples can afford to have, that love would carry them through anything. For the first few years, the marriage looked, from the outside, like something to envy. A house in a quiet subdivision, the kind with sidewalks and cul-de-sacs and neighbors who waved from their driveways. 2 cars. Then, in time, 3 children, Maren, Theo, and little Ruby, each born 2 years apart, each arrival celebrated with the kind of joy that made the sleepless nights feel worth it. Coralie put her own ambitions on hold. She had once dreamed of finishing her accounting degree, of working somewhere with her name on a door. Instead, she took on part-time bookkeeping work from home, squeezed between school pickups and pediatrician visits and the 1,000 invisible tasks that come with raising 3 children. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself there would be time later. Julian's career, meanwhile, flourished. Sales director at a regional logistics company, a title that came with a company car and a corner office and, increasingly, a reason to be somewhere other than home. Frequent travel. Frequent late nights. Client dinners that ran long, conferences that required weekend departures. Coralie noticed the changes slowly, the way most people do, not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 small ones that only make sense once you're looking backward. He stopped asking about her day. He started keeping his phone face down, even at the dinner table, even when the children were asking him questions he only half answered. He grew irritated when she asked simple questions. Where was he? Who was he with? Would he be home in time for Theo's game? She told herself it was stress. A demanding job. A man under pressure, carrying the weight of providing for a family of 5. She was, in many ways, protecting herself from a truth she wasn't ready to face, the way people often do when the alternative feels too large to survive. The truth found her anyway. It always does. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Laundry day. Coralie was folding towels on the living room couch, a basket of warm cotton between her knees, when Julian's work laptop, left open on the kitchen table, lit up with a message notification. She wasn't looking. Not really. She simply glanced up, the way anyone glances toward a sound or a flash of light in a quiet house. But she saw a name. A woman's name. Followed by a heart emoji. Her hand stopped moving. A single towel, half folded, sat forgotten in her lap. She told herself it could be nothing. A coworker being friendly. A group chat, maybe, something misread at a glance. She almost convinced herself. Almost. That night, once the children were asleep, once the house had settled into the particular silence that comes after bedtime stories and nightlights, Coralie sat at that same kitchen table with the laptop open in front of her, and she went looking for the truth. It took less than 20 minutes to find it. Messages stretching back 8 months. A coworker named Danielle. Photographs that made her stomach drop and her hands go cold. Hotel confirmation emails, dated and time-stamped, filed away in a folder Julian had clearly believed she would never open. A second phone plan, billed quietly to a P.O. box Coralie had never heard of, paid for in cash withdrawals disguised as household expenses. 8 months of a double life, hidden behind soccer practices and grocery runs and bedtime stories he still tucked their children in with, his voice never once wavering as he read them the same stories every night. Coralie didn't cry that night. Not yet. She sat very still, the glow of the laptop screen the only light in the kitchen, and she read every message twice, memorizing dates, memorizing details, understanding, with a clarity that frightened her, that the marriage she had built her entire adult life around had been quietly dying for the better part of a year, and she was the only one who hadn't known it. She closed the laptop just before 2 in the morning, and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum, waiting for a feeling that never quite arrived. Not yet. That would come later. She confronted Julian the following evening, after the children were in bed, the television murmuring quietly in the background as though the house itself didn't yet understand what was about to happen inside it. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Instead, he grew defensive, almost immediately, twisting the conversation into something about her, how she'd changed since the kids, how she was never available, how a man has needs, as though 8 months of deception were simply the natural consequence of her failing to meet some unspoken quota. Coralie listened to every excuse without interrupting, her arms crossed, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. Then she asked him to leave. He refused. It was his house too, he reminded her, his name on the mortgage, his income that had paid for most of it. That single sentence told her everything she needed to know about where she stood, about how quickly 10 years of shared life could be reduced to a line item on a mortgage document. If she wanted her children in a stable, drama-free environment that night, she would have to be the one to leave. Not him. So she packed. Quickly, quietly, while Julian sat in the living room pretending none of it was happening, the television still murmuring, his silence somehow louder than anything he could have said. 3 small bags for her children, filled with pajamas and favorite stuffed animals and whatever clean clothes she could grab in the dark without waking anyone. 1 bag for herself, packed almost as an afterthought. And in her mind, as she zipped the last bag closed, there was only one place that felt like an option. Home. Her parents' house. 20 minutes away. The house she had grown up believing would always have room for her, no matter what. She was about to learn how wrong that belief was. The drive took 22 minutes. It felt like hours. In the back seat, her children sat in stunned, sleepy silence. Maren, 8, old enough to sense something was deeply wrong, kept glancing at her mother in the rearview mirror, searching her face for reassurance Coralie wasn't sure she could offer. Theo, 6, quietly holding his stuffed rabbit against his chest, his small fingers working the worn fabric of its ear. Ruby, 3, asleep against her car seat straps, blissfully unaware that the world she'd fall asleep in was not the world she'd wake up in. Coralie's hands didn't stop shaking on the steering wheel, not once, the whole way there. She rehearsed the words in her head, over and over, the way people do before a job interview or a difficult phone call. Mom, I need help. Just for a little while. Just until I figure things out. Simple words. Reasonable words. Words she believed, with everything she had left, would be enough. She believed, with the kind of desperate faith only a person in crisis can summon, that family would show up when it mattered most, that this was precisely the situation family existed for. She had no way of knowing that the house she was driving toward was, in that very moment, filled with laughter, a small family gathering she hadn't been told about, hadn't been invited to, a celebration that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the family carrying on comfortably without her. She was about to walk into a party as an uninvited crisis, 3 exhausted children in tow, carrying nothing but bags and desperation. She pulled into the driveway just after 8 in the evening. Lights glowed warmly through the windows. Music, faint, drifted from inside, something upbeat, something meant for celebration. Laughter, real, easy laughter, carried through the walls in a way that made Coralie's stomach tighten before she even reached the door. Coralie sat in the car for nearly a full minute before she found the courage to get out, watching the warm light spill across the lawn, watching shadows move behind the curtains. She knocked. Her mother, Deborah, answered the door, wine glass still in one hand, and her expression shifted instantly from surprise to something colder, something guarded. "What are you doing here, Coralie? We didn't know you were coming." Coralie began to explain, her voice already trembling. "Julian. The affair. Nowhere else to go, not tonight, not with the kids standing right there in the cold, watching their grandmother's face for some sign of welcome." Her mother's face didn't soften. If anything, it hardened further. "There's no room for you here tonight. You should have thought about this before you let your marriage fall apart." As though the affair had somehow been Coralie's doing. As though 10 years of marriage collapsing overnight was a scheduling inconvenience rather than the worst night of her adult life. Her father, Harold, appeared behind her mother in the doorway, drawn by the sound of raised voices. He looked, briefly, at his 3 grandchildren standing in the rain, Ruby now stirring awake against Coralie's shoulder. Then he looked away, unable to meet Coralie's eyes. "We can't get involved in this," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the warmth she remembered from her childhood. And he began, slowly, to close the door. From somewhere inside, her younger brother Desmond's voice carried clearly over the music. "Guess Golden Girl's perfect marriage wasn't so perfect after all." Laughter followed. His laughter, and someone else's, a cousin, perhaps, or a family friend, someone enjoying the party Coralie had just interrupted, someone who had no idea, or perhaps didn't care, that a woman and 3 children were standing outside in the rain at that exact moment. Her older sister Priya appeared last, arms crossed over her chest, irritation plain on her face, as though Coralie's crisis were a personal inconvenience timed specifically to ruin her evening. "You always make everything about you, Coralie. We have guests tonight. This isn't the time." The door closed. Not slammed. Something worse than slammed. Closed slowly. Deliberately. As though Coralie wasn't even worth the energy it would take to slam it. The porch light clicked off a moment later, plunging her and her children into darkness, the rain still falling, the party continuing without them just feet away behind a closed door. Coralie sat in her car outside a 24-hour diner 2 miles from her parents' house, the neon sign flickering red and blue across the wet windshield. 3 sleeping children in the back seat, finally settled after the crying had stopped. $42 in her wallet. A phone at 11% battery, the charger left behind in the chaos of packing. No plan. No backup. No safety net. Just a car, a tank half full of gas, and a silence that felt enormous. For a long moment, she considered calling Julian. Begging him to let her come back, just for the children's sake, just until she found her footing, just until the humiliation of tonight faded enough to think clearly. Her thumb hovered over his contact photo, a picture from a beach vacation 2 years earlier, both of them smiling, neither of them knowing what was coming. She didn't press it. Instead, she opened her phone and typed something into the search bar. A single, small action that felt insignificant in the moment, the kind of decision made not from strength but from sheer necessity. Emergency housing assistance near me. One search. One decision, made from the lowest point of her adult life, typed with trembling fingers in a dark parking lot while her children slept feet away. It would change everything that came after. That night, once she was certain her children were fully asleep, their breathing slow and even, Coralie reclined her seat as far back as it would go, and she let herself break. Quietly. Carefully. So the sound wouldn't wake them. She cried in a way she hadn't allowed herself to since childhood, full body, silent, shaking sobs into the crook of her own elbow, years of accommodation and swallowed hurt finally finding their way out in that dark, cramped car. And then, sometime after midnight, she stopped. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat, looked at her 3 children sleeping peacefully in the back seat, trusting her completely to keep them safe, entirely unaware of how close their mother had just come to shattering. And she made a decision that would define the next 18 months of her life. She would never knock on that door again to ask for anything. The next time her family saw her, it would be entirely on her terms. A women's crisis shelter 40 minutes outside the city took them, and 3 days later, after a string of phone calls, waiting lists, and one social worker named Patricia who happened to have a cancellation come open at exactly the right moment. The room was small. Bunk beds against one wall, the paint chipped at the corners. A shared bathroom down the hall, its schedule taped to the door in careful, color-coded marker. Donated clothes in labeled bins, sorted by size, a small kindness that felt enormous to Coralie in those first days. It was nothing like the 4-bedroom house Coralie had left behind, nothing like the life she had built for a decade. But no one there closed a door on her. Coralie cried in the shower most mornings that first month, letting the water mask the sound, then dried her face and walked out to make her children breakfast as though nothing was wrong, as though her entire world hadn't collapsed just days earlier. She learned quickly that survival required a strange kind of performance, falling apart privately, holding steady publicly, for the sake of 3 small people watching her for cues on how afraid to be, how safe to feel, how normal this strange new life might eventually become. During the day, she made calls. Emergency assistance programs, one after another, some helpful, some dead ends. School enrollment for Maren and Theo in the new district, paperwork filled out at a shelter computer with a cracked screen. A pediatric clinic that offered a sliding payment scale for Ruby's asthma medication, a relief that brought Coralie to tears in the waiting room. She reached out to her old employer, a small local bookkeeping firm she'd done part-time remote work for during the marriage, work Julian had always dismissively called her little hobby, work that had never once been treated as anything more than pocket money in their household. She asked for full-time hours. Actual hours. Actual income. She asked with a directness she hadn't known she possessed. Her employer, a woman named Rosalind who had always privately admired Coralie's meticulous work, said yes without hesitation, without a single question about why the sudden change. It wasn't much. But it was something solid to stand on, the first solid ground Coralie had felt beneath her in weeks. 6 weeks into shelter life, Coralie was approved for a transitional housing program, a small 2-bedroom apartment, government subsidized, in a modest complex on the edge of town, the kind of place with thin walls and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. It had water stains on the ceiling and a stove with only 2 working burners, a refrigerator that hummed loud enough to hear from the hallway. It was, to Coralie, the most beautiful place she had ever lived. No one could close a door on her here. Because it was hers. Her name on the lease. Her key in the lock. A small, undeniable fact that she repeated to herself on the hardest nights. She furnished it slowly, piece by piece, from thrift stores and curbside finds and a second-hand bunk bed a co-worker's neighbor was giving away, driven home in the back of a borrowed pickup truck. Maren and Theo shared one room, their beds pushed against opposite walls, a shared dresser between them covered in stickers within a week. Ruby's crib, then later her toddler bed, sat in the corner of Coralie's own room, close enough to hear her breathing at night. At night, after the children were asleep, Coralie sat at a folding table with a second-hand laptop, working through online coursework toward finishing the accounting certification she'd abandoned in her 20s, the same dream she'd once set aside for a marriage that ultimately hadn't honored the sacrifice. She was exhausted in a way she'd never known exhaustion could feel, the bone-deep tiredness of working full days and studying through half the night, of being both mother and father, provider and protector, all at once, with no one to share the weight. But for the first time in years, the exhaustion belonged entirely to her own choices. No one else's excuses. No one else's secrets hiding behind a closed laptop. Meanwhile, divorce proceedings had begun, slow and bureaucratic, a paper trail of a marriage reduced to forms and filings. Julian, expecting a quiet, guilt-ridden ex-wife eager to avoid conflict, was met instead with a woman who had spent her sleepless nights doing more than crying. Coralie hired a lawyer who specialized in cases involving hidden marital assets and financial infidelity, a referral from Patricia, the social worker who had never quite stopped checking in, who had seen enough cases like Coralie's to know exactly which questions needed asking. It turned out Julian's affair had cost far more than emotional damage. Hotel stays, charged to a credit card Coralie had never known existed, each receipt a small, quiet betrayal documented in black and white. Gifts for Danielle, purchased with money that should have gone toward their children's needs, new shoes, school supplies, the small necessities Coralie had scraped together on her own instead. A second phone plan, funded quietly for the better part of a year, that Coralie now had documented in painstaking detail, every message, every date, every dollar, laid out in a folder her lawyer called, without exaggeration, one of the cleanest financial infidelity cases she'd seen in years. In mediation, Julian's lawyer tried to paint Coralie as vindictive, difficult, unreasonable, a woman punishing her ex-husband out of bitterness rather than seeking what was rightfully owed to her and her children. Coralie said very little throughout the proceedings. She let the documentation speak for itself, page after page, date after date, until the narrative Julian's side had tried to construct simply collapsed under the weight of evidence. The settlement, when it finally came through 9 months after that rainy night on her parents' porch, was more favorable than either she or her lawyer had initially expected. Child support calculated fairly, a portion of retirement accounts Julian had tried to quietly shield in an account Coralie hadn't known existed, and full custody, with Julian receiving supervised weekend visitation given his unstable housing situation with Danielle, a relationship that had already begun to fracture under its own weight. Coralie didn't celebrate the settlement. She simply filed the paperwork, thanked her lawyer with a quiet handshake, and went home to make dinner for her children, the way she had every night for months. There was work still to do. Bigger work than any courtroom could finish. Word did not spread fast through Coralie's family. She made certain of that. She stopped answering her mother's occasional, guilt-tinged text messages, the kind that asked how the children were doing without ever asking how she was doing, without ever once mentioning the rain or the driveway or the door. She stopped attending family functions altogether. Not out of spite, but out of something closer to self-preservation, a boundary she hadn't known how to draw before that night but now understood was necessary for her own survival. Meanwhile, her bookkeeping work at Rosalind's firm had begun to draw attention beyond the office. Coralie's meticulous eye for detail, her calm under pressure, her willingness to take on the accounts no one else wanted to untangle, all of it hadn't gone unnoticed by the firm's larger clients. 14 months after the door closed on her, Coralie sat for her accounting certification exam in a community college testing center, hands steady this time, mind sharp, years of quiet late-night studying finally converging into this single morning. She passed on her first attempt, a small, private victory she celebrated alone in her car afterward, allowing herself to cry for the first time in months, not from grief this time, but from something closer to relief. 3 months later, a regional chain of family-owned restaurants, one of Rosalind's larger clients, offered Coralie a position managing their finances directly, payroll, tax compliance, vendor contracts, the full scope of a small business's financial backbone, a level of responsibility she hadn't dared imagine for herself a year earlier. Her salary very nearly tripled overnight. She gave notice at the subsidized apartment complex with something that felt, for the first time in a year and a half, like genuine pride rather than mere survival, signing the paperwork with a steady hand and a small, private smile. The house Coralie found was modest by most standards, 3 bedrooms, a small fenced backyard, a driveway wide enough for 1 car and a scooter or 2, on a quiet street lined with maple trees. To her, it was everything. She signed the lease with an eventual path to purchase, her hand steady, her signature confident in a way it hadn't been in years, a woman who had rebuilt herself one difficult decision at a time. On the first Saturday after moving in, she spent an entire afternoon assembling a second-hand swing set in the backyard, refusing every offer of help from a kind neighbor who'd wandered over, sweat on her brow, instructions spread across the grass. She needed, this one thing to be entirely her own work, Every bolt tightened by her own hands, every piece assembled without anyone else's assistance, a small monument to everything she had built alone. That evening, she stood at the kitchen window watching her children take turns on the swings, their laughter carrying through the open window, the late afternoon sun catching the metal frame, and she allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel something she hadn't let herself feel in 18 months. Not relief, exactly. Pride. Earned, hard-won pride, the kind that comes only from having built something with your own two hands out of almost nothing. Every brick of this new life had been laid by her, alone, without a single door held open for her by the people who should have opened it first. Success, even hard-won success, did not erase the cost of what Coralie had survived. There were nights she still woke at 3 a.m., certain she'd heard a knock at the door, certain it was Julian, or worse, certain it was her mother, come to see what Coralie had built only to find some new way to diminish it, some new comment designed to shrink her accomplishments back down to size. There were moments, watching other mothers at school pick up laughing together, comparing notes about grandparents babysitting for date nights, when Coralie felt the particular loneliness of having built a village with no family in it, of watching other families operate with a safety net she no longer had. She started, eventually, seeing a therapist, twice a month, then weekly, a decision she'd once have considered an unaffordable luxury, but which her new salary and her new understanding of self-worth made possible. Her therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Sullivan, helped her understand something Coralie had suspected but never fully articulated, that the family who closed the door on her that night hadn't done so because of one bad moment, one inconvenient timing. They had done so because, for her entire life, Coralie had been the family member expected to accommodate everyone else's needs, comfort, and convenience, the reliable one, the flexible one, the one who wouldn't make a scene if overlooked, the one whose own crises were always somehow less urgent than everyone else's plans. That rainy night, she had simply, finally, become inconvenient, and her family had responded to that inconvenience exactly the way they always had, by looking away. Understanding this didn't erase the pain. But it gave her something more valuable than an apology ever could have, clarity, and with it, permission to stop waiting for a version of her family that had never actually existed. One evening, nearly a year after the move into the new house, Coralie's eldest daughter Maren, now 9, asked a question that stopped her cold. "Mom, why doesn't Grandma ever come to my recitals?" Coralie set down the dish towel she'd been holding and sat at the kitchen table with her daughter, the dinner dishes still soaking in the sink, the question hanging in the air between them. She chose her words carefully, honest, but age-appropriate, careful not to poison her children against family they might one day choose to reconnect with on their own terms, understanding that this was a decision only Maren herself could eventually make. Sometimes, Coralie said, grown-ups make choices that hurt other people, even family. Grandma and Grandpa made a choice that hurt Mommy very badly, on a night when we needed help the most. I'm still working through how I feel about that. Maren considered this with the particular seriousness only children can summon, her small hands folded on the table. Did they say sorry? No, sweetheart. Not yet. Are you gonna forgive them anyway? Coralie didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. I don't know, she said honestly. But I do know that whatever happens with them, you and your brother and sister will always have a door that's open to you. That's the only promise I need to keep. Maren seemed satisfied with this, in the way children often are when given honesty instead of false comfort, and returned to her homework. The conversation closed as quickly as it had opened. Coralie sat a moment longer at the table, turning the conversation over in her mind, uncertain when, or if, she would ever be ready to answer her daughter's question fully, or whether some questions simply didn't have clean answers. 18 months after the door closed on her, an envelope arrived in Coralie's mailbox, wedged between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer, as ordinary as any other piece of mail. Her mother's 65th, birthday. A family gathering. The same house. The same driveway where she had once stood in the rain with 3 children and $42 to her name. The invitation was addressed only to Coralie, forwarded stiffly through a group text her sister Priya had sent, more obligation than warmth radiating from every carefully neutral word. Coralie held the invitation for a long time before deciding what to do with it, turning the cardstock over in her hands at the kitchen table long after the children had gone to bed. Part of her wanted to burn it. Part of her, the part that had spent 36 years being the accommodating daughter, wanted desperately to go, to smooth things over, to be the bigger person one more time, the way she always had been. In the end, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She would go. Not to seek approval. Not to beg forgiveness for a crisis that had never been her fault. She would go because she was, finally, no longer afraid of that house, or that driveway, or the people inside it, and she wanted, more than anything, to prove that to herself. She would go on her own terms, for the first time in her life. Coralie arrived at her parents' house dressed sharply, confidently, her 3 children beside her, healthy, thriving, laughing in a way they hadn't in the better part of 2 years, dressed in clothes she had bought with money she had earned entirely on her own. Conversation in the crowded living room noticeably quieted when she walked through the door she had once been turned away from, heads turning, a ripple of awkward recognition passing through the room. Her brother Desmond, the same man whose laughter had carried through that door 18 months earlier, made a comment almost immediately, something about her finally landing on her feet, delivered with just enough condescension to make clear he still saw her as the family's cautionary tale, still expected her to shrink under his words the way she always had. Coralie didn't take the bait. She simply mentioned, in an easy, unbothered tone, where she now worked. What she now managed. The house she now owned, with an offer already in on a second, larger property in a better school district. She mentioned it once, briefly, without embellishment, her voice carrying none of the defensiveness Desmond had clearly been expecting. She didn't need to mention it twice. The silence that followed said everything, a silence far more satisfying than any argument could have been. Her sister Priya, who had once told her that her feelings didn't matter, found a reason to compliment Ruby's dress a bit too enthusiastically, an obvious attempt to smooth over the tension now radiating through the room. Near the end of the evening, her mother Deborah pulled her aside, into the same kitchen where, years earlier, family dinners had once felt like the safest place in the world. "We didn't know things would get that hard for you," Deborah said. Not quite an apology. Something adjacent to one, but not quite arriving at the destination, the words carefully constructed to acknowledge just enough without admitting fault. Coralie looked at her mother for a long moment, searching her face for something, regret, understanding, anything real beneath the careful phrasing. "You didn't ask," Coralie said finally. "You just closed the door." She gathered her children's coats before dessert was served, thanked her mother for the invitation with careful, practiced politeness, and left, the same driveway behind her now feeling smaller than it once had. She did not cry in the car this time. 6 months after that party, Coralie's phone rang late on a Tuesday night. Her sister Priya, her voice unsteady in a way Coralie had never heard before, cutting through the late hour like an alarm. Their father, Harold, had suffered a minor stroke. He was stable, the doctors said, but the road ahead would involve extensive physical therapy, medication, and mounting medical bills that their parents' modest retirement savings hadn't been built to absorb. The family scrambled in the days that followed, phone calls flying between siblings who rarely spoke otherwise. Desmond, still unemployed after more than a year, still living rent-free in their parents' basement, had no savings to offer, only vague promises to figure something out, promises that never materialized into anything concrete. Priya, living several states away with her own young family and mortgage, offered emotional support over the phone but little in the way of practical help, her own finances stretched too thin to contribute meaningfully. It was Coralie, the daughter who had been turned away in the rain, the daughter Desmond had mocked from behind a closed door, who quietly, without announcement, contacted her father's hospital billing department and covered the gap in his medical costs that their insurance hadn't fully absorbed, a decision she made alone, late one night, without discussing it with anyone. She didn't do it for gratitude. She didn't do it because she owed her parents anything. She did it because she had built, from absolutely nothing, a life strong enough to help, even after everything, even without an apology ever having been offered, because that was simply who she had chosen to become. She told no one but Dr. Sullivan, her therapist, for nearly 2 months. When her mother eventually discovered what Coralie had quietly done, through an offhand comment from a hospital billing coordinator, not through Coralie herself, she called, her voice breaking almost immediately. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say something?" Coralie let her mother talk, let the emotion pour out uninterrupted, the way she herself had never once been allowed to on that rainy porch 18 months earlier, giving her mother a courtesy she had never once received. When her mother finally quieted, Coralie spoke, calm and steady, her voice carrying none of the anger she might once have felt. "I didn't do this so you'd owe me anything," she said. "I did it because I'm not the person who closes doors, even when someone closes one on me first." There was a long silence on the line, the kind of silence that carries weight. "I'm sorry," her mother finally said. Quietly. Simply. The first real apology Coralie had heard in 18 months, unadorned by excuses or justifications. It didn't erase the rain, or the driveway, or the sound of that door closing slowly, deliberately, as though she hadn't been worth the effort of a slam. But it was, Coralie thought, a start. Perhaps the only start that mattered. Today, Coralie's children are thriving. Maren, now 11, has taken up competitive swimming, her medals lining a small shelf in her bedroom. Theo has developed a passion for building elaborate structures out of anything he can find, cardboard and tape and whatever scraps the recycling bin provides. Ruby, once a toddler asleep in a rain-soaked car seat, is now a chatty, confident 5-year-old who has no memory at all of that difficult first year, a small mercy Coralie is quietly grateful for every single day. Coralie's career has continued to grow. She now oversees finances for 3 separate business locations, and has begun, in her spare time, mentoring other single mothers navigating the same emergency housing systems that once gave her a bunk bed and a locked door of her own, offering the kind of guidance she wishes someone had offered her. Her relationship with her parents remains complicated, civil now, occasionally warm, but permanently changed by what happened on that porch. Some doors, once closed, alter the shape of everything that comes after, even when they are eventually, imperfectly, reopened. Her relationship with Desmond remains distant. He has, as of this recording, still not offered an apology of his own, still unable to fully reckon with the role his laughter played that night. Her relationship with Priya has softened slightly, built slowly through small gestures, a birthday card here, a supportive phone call there, neither woman quite ready to address the specific words spoken that rainy night, but both, perhaps, working towards something resembling repair. Julian, for his part, remarried Danielle 8 months after the divorce was finalized. The marriage, by all accounts, has been rocky, strained by the same patterns that once undid his first one. Coralie feels, when she thinks of it at all, no satisfaction in this. Only a quiet, distant relief that she is no longer part of that particular story. Coralie doesn't regret standing on that porch in the rain. She doesn't regret the silence that followed, or the parking lot, or the shelter, or any of the difficult, exhausting months that came after, because each of those difficult months taught her something she couldn't have learned any other way. Because that silence, that rejection, taught her something no comfortable, easy life ever could have, that she never needed anyone's permission to survive, to rebuild, or to become someone entirely her own. She built a life loud enough, sturdy enough, and entirely her own enough that no closed door could ever again define who she was, or what she was capable of becoming. If you take one thing from Coralie's story, let it be this: sometimes the door that closes on you is not the end of your story. Sometimes, it's simply the moment your real story finally begins. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments what part hit you the hardest. And if you believe in second chances built on your own terms, hit subscribe, because stories like Coralie's are exactly what this channel is here to tell.